Please welcome your host, Claire Beaumont.
Welcome back to the Leadership Experiment podcast, where we explore bold ideas, challenge traditional thinking, and deepen our understanding of leadership in today's complex world. My name's Claire Beaumont, and I'm joined today by three of my wonderful colleagues, Nithya Ramaswamy, Richard Kelly, and Sana Risana. Our focus today is cultivating authentic leadership. We'll be asking, why does authenticity matter more than ever before? What are the paradoxes with authentic leadership, and what are some of the criticisms of the model? But most importantly, how can leaders practically cultivate authenticity in themselves and others? So let's dive in. Nithya, in our dialogue, you spoke about the way that world leaders operate today, and said it's a way where they're operating in a context that is characterized by compounding complexity and constant change. Why does that particular environment or context really require the need for authentic leadership?
Yeah, it's a great question, Claire. This concept of authenticity and authentic leadership has really been amplified in the new world of work. The complexity of the business landscape we are operating in can be sort of summarized as what I call BARNI as an acronym. So BARNI stands for brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. With brittle, as humans, we want to feel secure and strong. And really, things that appear strong in today's context sort of break or fail under stress. And it is about trying to learn from those failures and making intelligent failures as we go because we don't have all the answers. Anxious is about wanting to feel in control, and there is that constant fear, Claire, of not knowing or making the wrong decision. So there's this sort of pervasive sense of worry and uneasiness about the future and the ability to manage it. So I guess how do we leverage data, process information, and really feel comfortable, really warrants the need for authentic leadership. Non-linear in Barney is really about the detours and the dead ends and unexpected outcomes. So we want some sort of predictability in this messy landscape. When you think about, digitization and the world we're operating in, employees want to have some sort of clarity and, way forward about their future and alternative pathways. And incomprehensible in Barney is about not having all the answers. Of course, we want to all be subject matter experts, right? But this is really where authentic leadership weighs in because we need to be able to lean into others' perspectives, adopt a growth mindset, and really listen to others as well. So it's this sort of environment where people don't look for perfect plans. They look for anchors and they look for trusted relationships. This is what matters most in terms of the character of leaders who are transparent, humble, and grounded in their values.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Can I just check up on something there, Nithya? So you're saying this construct of authentic leadership, you talked about growth mindset, you talked about being prepared to take perspectives from others, you talked about kind of all of these being things that build trust, and that's what's really required in this really complex, challenging, frankly, quite scary environment that we're operating in today. That's right?
Yeah, 100%. I think the fact that, and we've kind of characterized this landscape before by saying, there's volatility, there's uncertainty, and I think all of that's been compounded even further with with AI and sort of that disruption as well. And of course, with hybrid work, comes challenges of engagement and how do we sort of show authenticity in a virtual environment as well, right? When you're working remote. So there's so many of these things that, leaders need to look out for, not just in terms of capability, but in terms of how they come across.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's fascinating, Nithya, and I really love the way that you unpack the Barney acronym because I think it really normalizes some very normal human behaviors as we react to complexity and uncertainty. And to navigate our way through that, leaders need to build trust. And it's really hard to imagine that happening without showing and displaying vulnerability. And I think some of the simple things that you mentioned around you don't have to have all the answers. And actually, in my world, being able to ask for help and start to show that vulnerability inherently starts to build that authentic leadership muscle and that trust back within the group that you're seeking to lead and influence,
Mm. Yeah.
rather than a false confidence, rather than a narcissistic leader who it's all about them, which I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more about as we go through.
The topic lends itself, doesn't it? Yeah. Interesting. Senna, what's your take on all of this?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I also think when we talk about sort of trust and vulnerability, I think leaders, all of us, I think often we forget how much of ourselves we bring to the room, right? You know, what is going on for us, how we build that trust, how we demonstrate that vulnerability, how we ourselves are managing the complexity, the stress that we're under. And, you know, I think sometimes we think we're very good at hiding that and, you know, building the trust, but others don't necessarily feel it the same way. And I think when we are trying to be authentic, so when we are authentic leaders, it means that we are leaning into the reality of what's going on for us and how we are showing up and how can we use that to actually build more connection and more trust.
And I guess this is one of the paradoxes of authentic leadership, right? So, you know, we listen to experts or authorities like Brené Brown or Amy Edmondson saying, you know, lean into vulnerability as a leader. You go first, you show people it's okay to be vulnerable. And yet, on the other hand, we do know that as leaders that we need to provide certainty and clarity, and we need to be a steadying influence in times of crisis, more so in times of crisis. So that's one of the paradoxes for me of this construct, right? And yet, I look at people like Jacinda Ardern, right? Remember when they had that terrible incident in New Zealand, and she's on the front page of the news wearing a black headscarf, visibly emotional about the act of terrorism that had occurred, visibly showing kind of her raw emotion as she leads her country through a response to a horrific situation. And that for me is kind of that's the compelling the plus side of authentic leadership. I do wonder what the negative side of authentic leadership is, and I'd love to kind of hear your guys' perspective on that.
I think, Claire, it's good to distinguish first between authenticity and authentic leadership. There has been a lot of criticism around being authentic because, again, is this just another flavor of the month? We've heard, so many concepts around leadership that are centered around positive psychology. For example, transformational leadership, servant leadership, ethical leadership, and now authentic leadership. And as you said as well, with this whole concept of vulnerability. So, what really is the difference? Or is authentic leadership really quite unique in itself? So, I guess authentic leadership, in my mind, as I've been researching this topic, isn't just about self-expression. It is about how you lead others through who you are. So there's the word leadership there, which is really about how you lead others through that authenticity. As you said, authenticity without responsibility. And Richard, you kind of alluded to this as well, can slide into narcissism or the opposites of authentic leadership, which is what we call toxic leadership. So, that there is broader authenticity and there's authentic leadership. I think that's really the distinction we sort of need to be quite conscious of. And authentic leaders such as Jacinta Ardern are defined by that sense of heightened self-awareness, which includes both self-knowledge, but also the social awareness of really understanding and recognizing others' perspectives in varying situations.
Yeah, so again, it goes back to this construct of being an evolved leader, right? So what you're talking about here is emotional intelligence, ability to understand the way your emotions are showing up, the ability to read the emotions of others, and that responsibility piece that you talk about, which is that social connection piece and kind of the impact that you have. So, I mean, I guess what you're saying here, Nithya, is you can be authentic, but you can be an authentic, not very nice person. Or you can be an authentic leader who has a degree of authenticity in the way that you show up, but married with a level of responsibility for the team, the community, or the area that you're responsible for. Interesting. Sana, Richard, kind of what are you thinking about all of this?
Well, I think thinking about the attributes of the term authentic and contrasting it with authentic leadership and the general description of someone being, looking at a lens through their own authenticity is really pivotal to get a deep kind of gritty understanding, because you when you see Jacinda Ardern stand up in the scarf and it's authentic. It just it drips out of her. You look at during our dialogue, Nithya, you had a image of Steve Smith when he was stood down as Australian captain, crying. Yeah, totally. You would say Steve Smith is being authentic to his emotions, but it was all about himself. He was in misery for himself, not for the situation, and not showing empathy or having empathy, which I think is a clear trait of an authentic leader in the way we're describing it, because you start to talk about some of the big names that we see on our screens on a regular basis, the Elon Musks and even, if I dare say it, the Donald Trumps of the world. They would, and their followers would say that they're authentic to themselves in what they do, but they are 100% self-aggrandizing. Their ego is the main thing that leads to narcissistic traits. And in terms of what we're describing as authentic leadership, clearly not in the realms of authentic leadership, clearly not fit to lead us through the complexities that we find in many situations and transformations. And it'll be interesting to see how both of those are viewed by history.
I totally agree. And I think that's really kind of the essence of it, that authenticity isn't just about sort of thinking about ourselves and what it means to be us. There is the piece around, leading others and, feeling a sense of responsibility. Ethics probably feeds into it. And if you're keen to hear about that, but it is about sort of extending that outward and thinking more broadly outside of yourself as well. And I think we've got a lot of leaders who kind of just say, well, this is just who I am. This is just how I operate. And sometimes we think that's authenticity, but I think that really excuses behaviors that can cause damage, cause harm, cause hurt.
Yeah. And I mean, just picking up on that, Sana and Richard, to your point, with the Steve Smith example, I think one of the biggest traits or competencies underpinning authentic leadership is ethical decision making. So it is built on integrity and transparency and that concept of ethics, Anna, to your point. So, the actions of Smith and his leadership group, you know, obviously then highlighted the opposite of that, right? So as much as he might have been true to himself in the moment, there was a lack of integrity. Instead of upholding the spirit of the game, obviously the leaders condone cheating, right? So this not just undermine trust in within the team, but also within the larger community of the fans and the governing body and the global cricket community. And there's also the failure of transparency. So that's another critical competency of authentic leadership, where authentic leaders are expected to be honest, even in difficult situations. So, I think that's the other thing where, they sort of evaded that piece rather than being honest. Um, and it's being a role model, and we know the difference between leader and manager, right? Manager is sort of, a title, whereas a leader is sort of having to be a role model to set an example for their team and wider community. So, if you're permitting that sort of unethical behavior, then what does that say about you and your leadership as well?
It's when you're talking really about this constructive leadership shadow, right? And kind of that's amplified with the Steve Smith example. I mean, gosh, that's a great example, isn't it, of how kind of the actions of a small number of people can really compromise or tarnish an industry, or quite a significant kind of cohort of people. So Nithya, I mean, it's so interesting, this concept of authentic leadership. You've spoken to us about kind of some of the attributes or the competencies that go into being an authentic leader. So you've talked about kind of this construct of, I think you call it relational transparency, being open and honest in your relationships and in the way that you conduct your relationships. You've talked about being ethical in your decision making as well. What are the other competencies around authentic leadership? And I guess the question from that is, then how do you develop it? I'm curious.
Mm. Yeah, good question, Claire. And that's the number one question, right? Is this something that's inherent within a person, or is this something that really can be cultivated through learning methods? And that's really what my research is looking at through the eyes of a simulation or actor-based simulation to develop authentic leadership competencies. Um, Look, what the research shows is that authentic leadership consists of four competencies. So I've already spoken to two of them, relational transparency and ethics or ethical perspective. Um, but the four would be, so there are two that are more focused on the individual. So in terms of ethics, acting in line with your values, really anchored around behaviors such as integrity and your morals, right? The other one that's focused on the individual is what we call self-awareness. So really being conscious of one's strengths and limitations, and what's the impact you're having on others, and really consciously building personal insight and resilience through that heightened self-awareness. So those are the two that are focused on the individual itself. And then there are two competencies that focus more on the collective, which means that, it's more about that interaction with others, where we've talked about transparency, and that's really about being open and honest and building trusted relationships, and really being able to foster some collaboration across with your team and others in the system. And the second one within the collective capability, or the last competency we look at within authentic leadership, is what we call balanced processing. And what this simply means is decision making by really considering everyone's perspective. So, not just yours, or not just people that you kind of like or want to work with, but really considering diverse perspectives before making a sort of an intelligent decision, right? Like, I mean, Amy Edmondson speaks to this, that we don't have all the answers, and we never often have all the answers because we don't have all the information to arrive at that decision. But being able to strengthen group decision making and be inclusive in that approach is what balanced processing is about.
I love it.
I find that really, really insightful once again, Nithya, because what I've observed over time is that in many large organizations, you get appointed to a leadership position, which is really you're not being so much appointed to a leadership position, because we confuse quite often leadership with a management position. And people have this title leader, so people are expecting them to lead, but we're not giving them the correct tools to lead in complex environments. So yes, lots of leadership training focuses on self-awareness, but it doesn't have the balance of the other three, not by a long shot in many cases. So I think that if we're going to build that capacity within our leaders in an Australian context, we really need to be focusing on, once you're in these roles, understanding when you're managing and when you're leading, and that it's important to develop the attributes that enable us to build trust with people. And I think that's the bit that's lost. At many large corporations, there's a fear of failure. We've got to get it right. You get promoted by doing things consistently and not making mistakes, and that's your version of earning trust with your boss, so you can get promoted, as an example. And I think that sort of, I'm going to say, 20th century mindset is not going to enable us as a country to develop the leaders we need to be successful into the future.
I loved hearing, Nithya, about those four competencies. I think for me, when I talk a lot about effective leadership, and self-awareness is really at the heart of it. So I probably wasn't surprised to see that self-awareness is one of the key four competencies around authentic leadership. And then when it comes to listening to diverse perspectives, I definitely think as leaders, we often feel that we need to have the answers and we need to make decisions. So I love to see that there as well and sort of highlighted, and then being open and honest with others. For me, I'm really curious, Nithya, around the ethical perspective. Is that something you feel that we can develop? Can we develop morals and ethics in people?
Great
Yeah,
question, Sana.
and I think absolutely can be developed, Sana. I think it's about the method of how we cultivate that over a period of time. So it's not just about maybe attending a workshop on ethics or on self-awareness, but it's about the learning methods that really seek to explore or put leaders in a spot where you're going, hang on, I didn't think I would react that way. What's going on for me? So what I've found through my research is that authentic leadership really needs this phase of exploration and this concept of what we call trigger moments in learning to occur. So, leaders build that self-awareness by, and this could be through other methods as well, but in this case, I'm sort of exploring it using actor-based simulations. But you could almost cultivate self-awareness through a 180 or a 360, where or through adaptive challenges, right, where you pose ethical dilemmas, and you really get people sort of thrown into some sort of discord around having to manage that dilemma. And then you encourage dialogue and allow that experimentation with those new behaviors in a safe environment. So it takes a good skilled facilitator to really set this up, and create that safe space for people to have a bit of play and to explore and to, make some tough decisions based on a dilemma. And it takes good design as well to create an ethical dilemma that sort of models what we see in the workplace, and to bring that to the fore in the room with actors who then in character really simulate that sort of scenario. And then people have to, work as a team, and really these behaviors come out, right? Whether it's conscious or unconsciously. And then for us to then reflect on that and go, what did I do well, or what did I not do so well? And actually, was that the right decision? And there might not have been a right or wrong decision here, but what was in the best interest of the group? And let's sort of unpack that a little bit more. So I think to your point, yes, it definitely can be cultivated, but it does require thoughtful design, and thoughtful delivery learning methods such as actor-based simulations.
It's
Mm.
so interesting, Nithya, and I'm pleased to hear that we can cultivate this. Can you give us an example? You talk about these trigger moments and posing an ethical dilemma during the course of a simulation. Give us a practical example of what that might look like.
Yeah, so I can give you an example of how we did this with a group of leaders, and these are leaders who were doing their MBA in the university, and they are working adults, some of them fresh into work with maybe about 1 or 2 years work experience, and some of them seasoned leaders, right? Been in the workforce and managing teams for 20 years or so. And they were then, put into groups of 4 to 5 to really work through an ethical dilemma. In this case, the dilemma was really about an organization that was having to downsize because they were not, they were not financially performing. And the board had to really come in and get rid of one person in the team. And this was a team that was looking at technology and finance. And there were 4 people in the team with the team leader and the board, who is now, played by the group of learners in the room, had to sort of go through, piles of information and information about the company performance, but also information about that particular team that's going to be impacted, and really work through which one person in that team they would need to let go of. And that's a really tough decision, right? Coming in, not really knowing the team members, but really on what basis or criteria do they use to let go of somebody, and also looking at future performance and what this company seeks to do. What are the characteristics and how adaptable is that team? And which are the team members that are not just high performing but have the high potential as well, high degree of potential as well. So that simulation involved the so-called board or the group of leaders having to look at all the information and then interview the 4 team members one by one, and these were played out by actors. And so, interviewing them and asking them questions and really working as a team as well as a board team, who's doing what, who's leading, and their style of interview and, how they collaborate and make a decision and really weigh out, what's the criteria to make that assessment. So at the end of that simulation, they then had to make a call around who to let go of and provide the rationale back to the CEO of the company, who they've decided to let go. So that whole process itself is about exploration and working together and so on, and also being conscious. And this whole simulation is recorded. So in that particular course, there are video cameras, and the participants they know there are video cameras, but they don't really realize, or they're not really on the spot. They know they're there, but they kind of slip into their usual behavior. So this is something that, I did ask them after as well. Were you conscious of this, or were you putting on an act because you knew there's these cameras? And the answer is no. I was myself throughout that whole simulation, and yeah, I get the cameras were there, but it didn't really affect me at all. I mean, it was I was just being myself, and I was just trying to do. It felt real. It felt real, and it felt sad that we had to kind of let go somebody. The other trigger moment that then occurs is the participants watch themselves back. So they actually watch the video back in action and to really look at their body language, the way in which they were talking with their team members, the way in which they made that decision. And a lot of aha moments then come into play there. It's like, oh, I didn't realize that I was hesitating to ask a question, or I didn't realize that, I was looking at this only one person in my team when we were trying to make a decision, or I didn't realize I was bulldozing over when we were making a decision. So I think that watching yourself back is, again, a great learning method to help to create that trigger moment. which stays with them, right? So from the participants that I spoke to, they've attended this course probably about 2 years ago, and they still remember, you know, they kind of cringe thinking about those learning moments sometimes, but it stuck with them, and it's a lesson that they would apply back in the workforce.
I got to
Yeah.
say, I absolutely love behavioral simulations. I think they're so powerful. And I think we think of them as these fictitious environments where we behave in a different way, but actually all our patterns and behaviors show up in those simulations and the way they show up in our everyday work as well. So they can be extremely powerful.
Yeah, 100%. And Sana, I mean, we call them in marketing, we say these are moments that matter, right? As a leader and as an authentic leader, every moment, what are those moments that really matter, right? Um, I think those are the trigger moments, and if you can build that into your design of your learning and your delivery methods, your participants can really recognize the benefits of why authentic leadership is important and what the benefits are for me to really embrace that change as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm. I love that. I mean, I love this concept to kind of really replicating real life leadership, right? So it's kind of those more messy, human-centered decisions that we often trip up on, right? And so kind of introducing that into the development, I think it's really clever. Interesting. As we've been talking, one of the things I've been thinking about, and I'm curious, everyone on the call here to kind of reflect on this, because if you think about those four attributes of authentic leaders, self-awareness, ethical perspective, balance processing, relational transparency. I'm curious, kind of Nithya, Richard, Sana, which one do you think is your ultimate strength? And I'm interested for people on the podcast who are listening to this to think about that as well. Can I throw that into the conversation?
Sure, why not? Well,
Why not?
it's a hard one, right, Claire? And it's a constant evolution, I think. I think I'm really doing well with self-awareness, and then I realize, hey, maybe I'm not doing that well. So again, as an authentic leader, that concept plays out not just at the workplace, but in your home and with your friends and in your relationships. And so, I might be fantastic at work, but then my daughter tells me I'm not very self-aware. So there you go.
My daughter tells me that as well, Nithya. What about you, Richard?
Thanks, Claire. I it's really interesting when you start to drill down and you mentioned the triggers and moments that matter. And I think for me, the whole concept of being open to ask for feedback, which creates this, you're literally asking for help for yourself when you think about it, and that starts to create an authentic vulnerability within the workplace. So as you as the leader are asking for feedback from your team, and you constantly asking that, and of course, in the beginning they're going to be a bit hesitant to give the boss or the leader feedback, but when it's create that culture within the team, and that's going to lead to incredible levels of trust, which is it all feeds into this concept of being an authentic leader, and it all starts with, for me, asking for feedback.
Okay. Okay. I guess that's balance processing, isn't it, Nithya?
Yeah, I think that's what it is, right? Because it's about, really seeking perspective and
Yep.
being willing to ask. Absolutely.
Mm. What about you, Sana?
What are my strengths? What is my
Yeah.
greatest strengths
Yeah.
of the four? Look, it's a tough one. I feel as a very critical person, I look at them and I feel like I've got development needed in all of them. A lot of people say that I've got a lot of values and morals, and I act according to those. So maybe that's my strength, but I've definitely spent my whole lifetime trying to build my self-awareness and be more open, be more honest, and always asking for other perspectives. So hopefully I'm
Yeah.
doing okay in those areas as well.
Nice, nice. Yeah, it's a good aspirational list of attributes to have as a leader,
Yes.
isn't it? For sure. Awesome. Um, so I guess let's wrap with some practical takeaways here. So I guess, if we as we kind of come to a conclusion of this dialogue, I'm keen to hear from each of you some practical takeaways for the listeners. Nithya, your dialogue, your research, your PhD, words from the guru. Tell us a key takeaway.
Yeah, I think, if I can just add two takeaways there, Claire. One is, yes, authentic leadership is not just a label or a flavor of the month. It is real, and it is underpinned by competencies, which are validated in the research. And it is not just about self. It is about in the interest of others, which we saw with the competencies of, balance processing and transparency. So that's one. So it's not just another label, and it's not just a, heroic idealization of what leadership is. And it is something that's here to stay. The second is, I think, for people listening on the call who are, learning practitioners and, facilitators in the space of leadership, to really be quite thoughtful around how we cultivate that. It's not an easy fix. It's not something that you could just, run a one-day workshop on. It does require thoughtful design, and it does require that concept of trigger moments, and how do you sort of inject that through learning is a sort of a provocation I would like the audience to think about.
Thank you. Some great tips there. Thank you. Richard, what about you?
For me, because it parallels into a lot of the research that I do, is this ability or need to listen to diverse perspectives to start to understand the organization, the culture, whether you want to call them, whether that's one-on-one, or whether that's in focus groups. But I think that innate want to understand and complexity, which can only be done by seeking diverse perspectives, I think is a hallmark of authentic leadership, and something that definitely needs to be cultivated.
Sure. Yeah, 100%. So that kind of seeking perspective, seeking feedback, inclusive leadership piece. Yeah, 100%. And what about you, Sana?
Well, Nithya just said that authentic leadership is not just about the self, but I think for me, I would think about how can you build more of your self-awareness. You know, think about, reflect on why are you the way you are? Why do you behave the way you behave? What are some of your values? And are your behaviors aligned with those values? And what type of leader do you want to be? And then, you can start trying to shift your behavior in small ways. Notice what happens, how people respond, how much more effective you become. That's probably my key takeaway.
Yeah, I love that. And you're talking very much about constructive leadership, Shadow, and being consistent with what you say and how you behave and what you measure and what you give time to. So, and that's the thing I like about this constructive, authentic leadership. I mean, for me, I like the fact that it's rooted in this constructive emotional intelligence. So to be an authentic leader, you need to be self-aware, you need to understand the impact of your behavior on others, you need to be able to read them, and you need to care about that and want to do something about that. I like the fact that it's related to inclusive leadership and around being super open to the perspectives of other people. And I like the fact that there are some things that you can do to introduce this kind of real aha trigger moments, which is where we see authentic leadership in action. So Nithya, it's been a really great dialogue. I've loved hearing more about your research. I've loved kind of diving into this topic with everyone. And as always, encourage you to tell your friends about the leadership experiment, to pass forward this podcast to anyone who you think might be interested, and most importantly, join this kind of dialogue, join our community of people who are interested in leadership. So as we come to a wrap today, it's been once again a really rich and human-centered conversation around leadership. Thanks so much, Nithya, Richard, and Sana, for your contribution to the dialogue, and thanks also to our listeners today. And remember, as a kind of parting thoughts on the conversation, cultivating authentic leadership, it's not about being flawless, it's about being human. It is about engaging in deep reflection. It's about experimenting with new ways of showing up. And it's also about staying curious through inquiry. So again, kind of building on some of the previous constructs that we've talked about in terms of curiosity, etc. So this has been a really rich and very human conversation. Thanks so much, Nithya, Richard, and Sana. And thank you to our listeners for your interest in this dialogue. As we leave, a couple of parting thoughts. Being an authentic leader is not about being flawless. We're all human. It's about leaning into your humanness, cultivating your self-awareness, thinking about how you show up, and being, as far as possible, consistent between values and actions. Authenticity without responsibility, as we've discussed, is not authentic leadership. It's that combination of showing up as your authentic self, combined with that responsibility for the people that you are responsible for. So, as always, until next time, lead with courage, lead with care. Over and out.
For more information on the Leadership Experiment and to join our community, please go to www.theleadershipexperiment.com. Thank you for listening.